Thanks, Nathan, and welcome everybody. It's nice to be here with you for this Northern Youth Group about the Sons of Korah. Now, it's often been said that you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your families. But we can all choose to follow God. We can all choose to serve him or not, and to walk in his ways or not. We all look like our parents in some way or not, whether you like that or not. We may choose to be like them or not. We might have similar expressions to our families, to our mothers or fathers, and similar mannerisms. But what we can choose to do is be like our God. And this is very true in the case of the sons of Korah, as we just read there, as their father burnt in fire right before their very face, and they lived. They were like him, maybe they looked like him, maybe they had similar expressions, maybe they had similar facial expressions to their father, but they could not have been less like him spiritually. And whilst their father rebelled against God and paid with his life, these boys speak of faith and courage in the face of adversity, and it's a great lesson for us and challenges us who live in a crooked and perverse generation to make a stand, to dare to be different no matter what the circumstances are around us. I'm not saying from the outset that you all need to rebel against your parents. I'm sure you've all got fabulous parents, and that's why you're here tonight, because they want you to be here, they brought you up to love the truth, and I'm sure they do as well. But the Northern Youth Group theme being standing in a fallen world is apt, and we're going to take it as that lesson tonight, that application. And so here's a group of men full of faith and courage who stood in a world that was falling around about them. Korah, Dathan and Abiram all dying, 250 princes burnt up in fire to a cinder as well. 3 boys stood aside from that. What are we going to do, young people, in this world in which we live? How are we going to stand aside from the adversity that may face us as the time comes? Well, what these boys did for the next 1,000 years taught their family after family after family to live like they did. And they actually... and we'll look at one of these psalms a bit later on, they actually wrote 11 psalms. You may not have known that. You might have known Psalms of David, maybe Psalms of Asaph. But these sons of Korah are actually responsible for 11 psalms, which we're going to look at a couple of those tonight. What made them stand as separate? What made them write these things to stand for 1,000 years and be different? And there's some fabulous things there when we get to them shortly. Some psalms which you think, I know them off by heart. And you never realise that they were of the sons of Korah in this chapter here. Well, the background, of course, is the rebellion of Korah. And if you're taking notes, be quick as you can. And we're going to look at some of the facts about this. You notice in verses 1 and 2 that there were actually 4 principal leaders of this. If you go back to verse 1, it actually says there was Korah, there was Dathan, there was Abiram, and we never hear of the 4th one, On. A person, he never occurs again. So it seems like there was 3 principal leaders. Maybe On changed his mind. He was there at the start. He changed his mind and said, I'm not going to be part of this rebellion. And he went his own way. But there was 4 people in the first place. And Korah, Dathan and Abiram are the ones singled out. And Korah is the leader. So if you go to verse 8, which we read, Moses said unto Korah. So he talks unto him personally, because he was the particular leader. And also in verse 16, Moses said unto Korah, Be thou and all thy company. So Korah was the leader. And tonight we're looking at the sons of Korah who stood aside from that. There was 250 princes also who stood aside in this rebellion. They're mentioned in verse 2. They rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel. 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown, so well-known people, stood aside in this rebellion. This is significant in the history of Israel. And Korah, being the ringleader, set up his own tabernacle in defiance of the real tabernacle. So if you go to verse 24, verse 23 says, Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the congregation, saying, Get you up from about the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan and Abiram. So there's a tent, there's the tabernacle of Moses, if you like. And he, in a sense, he's set up his own spiritual one, his own tabernacle, his own place of worship. And so he's singled out for doing that. What a rebellion that was. The rebellion is called Korah and all his company, or the company of Korah in those places. And the blame was squarely laid on Korah when we read in verse 22, shall one man sin? It's all one person. He is the ringleader. He is the one who stands out. Now, it's interesting, when you go towards the end of that slide, it says, Dathan and Abiram's family suffered the same fate as their fathers. And as we read, a big earthquake swallowed them up. And you can imagine if you look down the hill and there was an earthquake and a big gulf opened up, you imagine all the Golden Grove suburbs just going. This is what happened to Korah's friends, Dathan and Abiram and all his family. You think of that, just being swallowed up. The earth swallows them up, covers them back over again. We don't see those things happen today, not in Australia anyway. But then the 250 princes suffered the same fate as Korah. They were burned with fire. And if you want to jot those quotes down, because if you follow those three quotes in that order, maybe you can swap the last two around. Korah burnt with fire. You don't get that impression from number 16. You have to read the other two quotes. He burnt to a cinder as well as the 250 princes. So Dathan and Abiram and his family swallowed up by an earthquake. Korah and the 250 princes were burnt in fire at that time. It's huge. And you might think when you read the chapter, well, gee, what were they guilty of? You know, didn't see that bad for something so significant to happen. What were they guilty of? Well, the accusations against Korah were three things, and they're in verse 3 of number 16. He said, you take too much upon you, you're too busy and you need help. And you think, well, that's actually a nice thing. If someone offered you to help you out to do something, you think, well, that's fabulous. Someone's here to help me out. That's great. Help me. But they're singled out as there's something wrong. Why? Because they said the whole nation was holy. You got to remember that Korah was a Levite. And you say, all this whole nation is holy, therefore me being a Levite, I could be the leader and not Aaron. I could do this. Dathan and Abiram were Reubenites, and they're still angry that Judah was going to be the leader. They wanted to be in charge. And so when you read put those things together, we have a significant rebellion against Moses and Aaron. And they also said Moses and Aaron had elevated themselves above the rest of the nation. And that's at the end of verse 3 there. You lift yourselves up above the congregation of Yahweh. So three things they had done wrong, three complaints which were voiced. And so Jude in verse 11 calls it the gainsaying of Korah, antilogia, against the word, contradiction, disobedience. Why? Because God set these things up in place. Who are we to change it? What about Dathan and Abiram? They actually went a little bit further. It seems like Korah was ringleader, but he got Dathan and Abiram to do a bit more of the dirty work. And they actually said a little bit more. So Korah said these three things. When you turn over the page into verse 13 and 14, Dathan and Abiram said a lot more. It's like they did the dirty work for Korah. And they said, we're not going to come up because is it a small thing that has brought us up out of the land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness? Except thou makest thyself altogether a prince over us. And so they're actually going further. They're saying you failed in bringing Israel into the promised land. You've taken Israel out of the land flowing with milk and honey. You want to kill God's people. And you're lifted up with pride and exalting yourself above others. So this is a significant thing. This is a big rebellion in Israel. Korah said his bit. Dathan and Abiram added a bit more. And, well, the consequence was earthquake and fire. So it is significant. And if that was to happen here, well, we'd all be running in every direction, wouldn't we? Now, when we go a little bit further, the Korah's rebellion, and thanks for those who put the notes together because they actually said these points, the Korah's rebellion was actually against Yahweh. So those notes that were given out by the doorman actually says this as well. While it says in number 16 verse 3 that they gathered themselves against Moses, when you go a bit further in Numbers, it says they strove against God, they provoked Yahweh, they gathered themselves against Yahweh in the company of Korah. So it wasn't good. Korah's rebellion wasn't against Moses at all. It was actually against God. So God took it personally. When God takes something personally, well, watch out. And this is what happened in this case. Make sure you take God's word for what it says. Don't change it. Don't contradict it. Don't add your own flavour to it if it's not there. And this is what they did. Now, what was the reactions to this? Now, I might just throw this one out there. Usually you can tell if something's a good or a bad idea by people's reactions. What was Moses' reaction in this chapter? Just throwing it out there. He fell on his face. So it was that significant. Over he went and fell on his face, hands down first, I'd imagine. Didn't break his nose, but if you read it like that. What else did Moses do in this chapter? Go a little bit later in the teens.
He was very wroth and asked God to not respect their offering.
Yeah, I know. He said, don't even respect their offering. So Moses almost makes a judicial decision as well. So when you add those things together, this is his reaction. He fell upon his face. He's saying, are you seeking the priesthood also? Do you want to go over and above and be the priest? He was very wroth. He asked God not to accept any offering they made. He even says this is what Yahweh's going to do as well in verse 28 and 29. And he said, these men had provoked Yahweh in verse 30. So Moses, it was wowee. And he's angry, he's wroth, his face has gone red. He's extremely disappointed because he can see it as a rebellion, not against him, but against God. What was God's or Yahweh's reaction in this chapter? And it's not in the teens, it's in the 20s. Early 20s. Like in 21.
God was going to destroy the whole congregation.
Absolutely. He says, separate yourselves. So he says to everybody out there, separate yourselves from this. Otherwise, you're going to get the same fate. And there's a million people out there. There's a million people that are going to suffer the same fate. So he was very angry as well. So Yahweh's reaction was, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. And in verse 24 to 26, depart, I pray you, from the tent of those wicked men. Touch nothing of theirs, lest you be consumed in all their sins. Therefore the punishments were laid out on Korah, the 250 princes, Dathan and Abiram, and their followers. Everybody else stood aside. 3 people also stood aside. Come with me to Numbers 26 and verse 11. And this adds a little bit more to what happened on that day. It talks about in verse 9 of Numbers 26 that those who strove against Moses and against Aaron in the company of Korah, when they strove against Yahweh, the earth opened up her mouth, swallowed them up. Together with Korah, when that company died, what time the fire devoured 250 men, and they became a sign. Verse 11, notwithstanding, the children of Korah died not. 3 boys stood aside from this terrible tragedy that happened. Dathan and Abiram, all their family died. Korah and the 250 princes all burnt and died. 3 boys stood aside. And for the next 1,000 years, they are a sign, they are a witness to all of us today as to what sort of people we're going to be, what sort of Christadelphians we're going to be in the last days. They stood aside. They made a public stand against those things that happened in the land, that rebellion against Yahweh. Who were these boys that stood aside from this grave situation? Who are these that stood against this charismatic, rebellious person? Well, their names are actually given to us in Exodus. Their names are Asir, Abiasath, and Elkanah. And you can actually make a bit of a sentence out of those names, actually. Asir, a prisoner. He was a prisoner to his father, if you like. Abiasath, my father is an adder, like the death adder, the venom of a snake. But then in Elkanah's name, the third person mentioned, well, God has purchased us for a reason. And I think we can take that lesson for ourselves as well, especially when you read Proverbs 13, verse 20. He that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed. And some of those opening remarks given by Brother Stephen were very good. And make sure, young people, that if you need to talk to somebody who is a role model, someone who can help you, especially if you suffer difficulties in any particular trial. Don't keep it bottled up in your own mind. And I've seen some of those things firsthand in my own family, and make sure you talk about it. It's very, very, very important. So these 3 boys who were prisoners to their father, who was full of poison, recognised that they were purchased by God. They stood aside from the companionship of fools and they walked with wise men. And it must have been difficult to make that public stand against their very influential, charismatic and powerful father. But the lesson for us is, of course, we live in a difficult world. It's trying to make us to conform to its image. And it's tough, and as a parent, a grandfather these days, I take my hat off to my own children and to those who are having children at the moment, to boys and girls who get together and want to get married and do. And I stand aside with amazement as to how you are going to do it and how you do it. And it is fabulous. So don't take that as a negative thing. I think it's absolutely amazing. I love your energy and the things that you do. And make sure you keep on doing it. And that's the story of Korah's boys. So as we said, these boys wrote these psalms. Well, actually, no, I'll show you on the context of that. Slide, I snuck in a photo of the Wigsell family. Nathan's in here. Nathan, where are you, Nathan? Up the back up there. That's me, of course, and my wife. I married a Wigsell. So the Wigsell parents who are responsible for all that is Alan and Maureen Wigsell. They're in their late 70s now, and he's not a rebellious leader at all. Probably his last dying words, if Christ doesn't come in time, will be about the truth. Nathan, you know that. He does not stop talking about it when you're in his presence. But you go on 1,000 years, will his progeny, will his family still be talking about the same values that he does? Will my family be doing that? I've got a family now over in America. There's our daughter Felicity. She married an American. There's their little daughter Olivette and little Asher down there. Will they be doing that? What will I be remembered as a father? Young people, what are you going to be remembered for? And when you have family and one day when you're grandparents, will your little grandchildren be acting out or saying things that you say? Principles and values that you live by. This is what I live by. I'm standing up for the truth. Will they be doing that? Now, quite often, as children do, they remind you of your funny moments in life and your inadequacies. My daughter Natalie, who unfortunately, she doesn't know I'm saying this. That's Natalie. She married Joe Davison. That's their little son Eddie. She was pregnant then. She's actually had the baby since, Florence. But she was stirring me up the other day, and because after the readings, I'd always make supper, and now at supper time, I'd get out and I'd say, who says that men can't do two things at once? You know how we say that? Men can only do one thing at once, women can do many things at once. And I'd actually dunk a tea bag while I'm stirring a coffee. And you can do it. And I just thought that was just a funny thing to do, but I get quoted about that all the time. And I think, in 1,000 years' time, if my great-great-great-grandchildren are still doing that, I'll be very disappointed. I'd be hoping that they'd be quoting me on much more positive things. But that's what happens in family life. But will this family be doing that in 1,000 years' time, like these sons of Korah? Will yours be doing it? What values have you got, young people, that you're developing now that you're going to help carry on into the future? And we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know. We don't know what trial's going to come our way. If someone gave us a crystal ball at baptism and said, this is what your life's going to be like, we'd find that very difficult, because we will go through trial in life. We will go through difficult moments, but God is with us all the way through those moments. What's this family going to do? What's your family going to do? Well, let's make our way to Psalm 42. And just quickly for a moment, just look at one of these psalms in which these sons of Korah wrote, or the progeny of Korah wrote. This is the first one in the list, and we'll show a little bit more in a moment. Just want to read two words with you of this psalm. Psalm 42 says at the start there, you've got the superscription and the subscription. You've got to the chief musician, which belongs to the previous psalm, but the subscription, which is masculine, for the sons of Korah. Now that word for there can be of or for. It's the same Hebrew words. Wherever you read a psalm of David or a psalm of Asaph, it's the same Hebrew word. So where it says for there, it should be of. It's a masculine of the sons of Korah. So it's their family wrote these psalms through history. And look at verses 1 and 2. As a hart panteth after the water brook, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. My soul thirsteth for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? What a lovely couple of verses. He's thirsting. He wants to know the living God. He loves the word of God. He's disappointed and he's upset, as we see in verse 3. My tears have been my meat all the day and night. And he wants to be with his God. And this is the son of Korah who's saying this. Sometime through history, he's not one of those 3 boys that stood aside from Korah in Numbers 16. He's one of his family. And one of his family have written this psalm, this lovely psalm, which we're going to look at a little bit more. How do we know a bit more about this family? What do we know about this one? Well, let's discover a little bit more about the sons of Korah and go to 1 Chronicles chapter 9, please. This is going to tell us a little bit about their background and who they are and why they wrote these psalms, which we're going to look at a little bit closer in a moment. Because really, we don't actually have much more than a couple of scriptures and 11 psalms to look at to tell us about them. In 1 Chronicles chapter 9, we have a list of the duties that would be done in temple service. We have in verse 19, Shallum, the son of Kor, the son of Abiasaph, the son of Korah, and his brethren of the house of his father, the Korahites. And so we have one of those sons mentioned, and so therefore his family, the Korahites, were doing some service in the temple. What are they doing? They're keepers of the gates, so they're gatekeepers. And if you want to mark next to that, next to gatekeepers, mark in Psalm 84 verse 10, which says, I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. There's a Korahite who said this. Being over the host of Yahweh were keepers of the entry. So they looked after the entry of the temple, the gates around about the temple as well. And these were what the Korahites did. And if you go to verse 20, and Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, was ruler over them in time past, and Yahweh was with him. He was also a relative of Korah as well. And he's a role model to them. The word ruler there means commander, a captain or a chief. And it would seem like he was actually younger than the sons of Korah. But they looked up to him spiritually, and we know what Phinehas did at the tabernacle as well, when he put that spear through those 2 people near the door of the temple. So Phinehas had a zeal for Yahweh, and he was a Korahite. So when you start putting these things together, and you can go through the rest of the chapter, these sons of Korah, their family, for the next 1,000 years, were doorkeepers of the house of God. They looked after the treasuries in the chambers of God's house, verse 26. They were responsible to open the doors daily, verse 27. They took care of the sacred vessels, in verse 28. They handled precious substances, and they also handled the showbread. So these sons of Korah, ever since they rebelled from their father Korah, were influential and worked in the service of the temple. And we've got a little comment there at the end from a brother who wrote about this subject. He says, we conclude that for men to be set over areas of storage such as these, especially the treasuries, they need to have been of the highest integrity, totally trustworthy, beyond bribery. The sons of Korah were such men. So are you that responsible in ecclesial life, young people? Can you be trusted? More pertinently, will you be trusted? You know, the hardest thing sometimes, amongst many hard things, but sometimes the hardest thing in the ecclesia is, for a young person, is where am I going to fit in? What am I going to do as I grow up in ecclesial life? And my lesson for you, as I learnt, is to be patient. It will come. For me, when I was in my early 20s, I was asked to do Sunday school teaching, and I haven't stopped teaching since, and I love teaching it. I had Ethan Hall still sitting next to me in Sunday school, until recently, of course. I've always said to my children, when you get asked to do something in the ecclesia, do it, because that's God's way of telling you what to do. You don't get a light bulb moment, you don't get a zap from heaven, you don't get a voice in your dreams that says this is what you need to do in ecclesial life. You only know because when people ask you, that's where your talent might lie. And do it with all your might. Do it with zeal. Do it like a Phinehas or a son of Korah. Because us oldies need you. I can't believe I just said that. I've always felt I was young, but us oldies need you. Before I go on a holiday, I always get what they call a holiday haircut. I don't know if you do that. You get a haircut just so when you go on holiday, I don't know, you look a bit more, I don't know, respectable, whatever it is. And when I got my last haircut, just before we went to the USA to see our daughter Felicity, just noticed every time I get a haircut, there's more grey hair on the floor, each time. It's strange, that. And I said to the guy cutting my hair, I said, yeah, you know you're getting old when you see more grey hair on the floor every time you get a haircut. And he says, oh, sorry, mate, I can only see white hair. So he popped my bubble and taught me, yeah, okay, I'm getting old and a bit older, maybe a bit over the hill. And we need you so to carry on the truth. And so in 1,000 years' time, your great-grandchildren and further on will be doing it as well. We need you to do that. We all do it incrementally. There's no big game changers in Christadelphia. We all do it bit by bit by bit. And we all do our little bits incrementally. We all help one another and work together as families. So if we could summarise a little bit more about the Sons of Korah and some of those people. So obviously what we learned from Chronicles was they learned the value of faithful doorkeeping, to protect God's place of worship, to follow the zeal of Phinehas. But we also know that Samuel was a son of Korah. He was a descendant of Korah. He opened the doors. We know that in Samuel. He opened the doors. That was his duty. That was his role. We also know Heman, Samuel's grandson, was involved in music as well. He led David's musical orchestra in 1 Chronicles 25, verse 4 to 5. And he was also given charge of certain gates of the east and north of the temple as well. So these people were unbelievable people, as you are as well yourselves. On the outside, they kept the unholy out. But on the inside, they kept that holiness in. So they made sure that no unholiness ever came into the ecclesial hall, into the truth. But on the inside, they kept that holiness there, and they kept it pure, and they kept it as good as possible. And that's what we need you to do yourselves. It was their purpose in life to preserve God's sanctity and God's worship. They had a strong connection to the door, and they were positive guides, directing and helping people in worship through music, through doorkeeping, and through the treasury as well. They were fabulous people. And so they wrote these 11 Psalms. Now, is anybody here mathematical and trying to add those up? There's 12 there. I'm going to pop your bubble and say that there's actually 11 there. Okay, let's go to Psalm 42. And we're going to look at a bit more detail about this psalm and find out a bit more about this wonderful son of Korah. And I'm going to suggest to you that 42 and 43 are one psalm. And as we saw, it's a maskil for the sons of Korah. Now, if you've got a colouring in pencil, I've done all those subscriptions in red. Maskil for the sons of Korah. If you want to colour that in, because I'm going to tell you all of them. They are on the screen, but just a little activity if we can. Colour that in. Then go to Psalm 44. At the end of the subscription, it says, for the sons of Korah. Notice we jump Psalm 43 and saying, hang on, Uncle Rick, where's Psalm 43? There isn't one. That's a proof that there's only one psalm. Go over to Psalm 45. It says, for the sons of Korah, a maskil, a song of loves. It's all about the king marrying his bride. And it starts off, my heart is inditing a good matter. It's a beautiful psalm. Psalm 46. For the sons of Korah, a song upon Alamoth. Psalm 47, a psalm for the sons of Korah. Colour that in. And also Psalm 48, a song and psalm for the sons of Korah. Now, you might have never appreciated that, but look at Psalm 48, verse 1. Great is Yahweh, greatly to be praised in the city of our God. So a fabulous psalm about the kingdom. Great is Yahweh, greatly to be praised in the city of our God. And down in verse 12 it says, walk about Zion, go round about her, tell her towers. Mark well her bulwarks, consider her palaces. And look at this. This is a son of Korah comment. That you might tell it to the generation following. That's what they did. That's what your family is doing with you. That's what you're going to do with your family, and so on and so on. And so if we're around in another 1,000 years on this, which we won't be, Christ will come, our great-great-great-great-grandchildren will be teaching these things as well. Psalm 49 has the same thing, a psalm of the sons of Korah. Psalm 84, so we skip a few, we go right over to Psalm 84. A psalm for the sons of Korah. And it's verse 10, which we quoted earlier, for a day in thy courts is better than 1,000. I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. I'd rather be here. I'd rather be at the door than to be outside in the world on a Friday night. That's also Psalm 85 as well, another beautiful psalm, a psalm for the sons of Korah. Also Psalm 87, 86 isn't, it's a psalm of David. A psalm or song for the sons of Korah. And also it's Psalm 88. You'll see there it says, a song or psalm for the sons of Korah. And it's probably one of the most difficult psalms to read in that one. If you've done that, let's go back to Psalm 42 and just discover a few things about this psalm. What was this son of Korah doing? Where did he live? And where in history was this son of Korah? Is it consistent with what we've been saying so far? Chapter breakup, if you like, 42 verse 1 to 5, he's yearning for God. 42 verse 6 to 11 is the oppression of the enemy. And 43 verse 1 to 5, it's a prayer for deliverance and guidance. And what you know, there's actually 3 stanzas in this psalm as well, which finishes the same way. So the first section, verse 5, finishes, why art thou cast down, O my soul? Why art thou disquieted in me? Hope thou in God, for I shall yet praise him, for he is the help of my countenance. That also occurs in verse 11, and it also occurs in Psalm 43 and verse 5, which shows that maybe they were one and the same psalm. Why art thou cast down? Why art thou cast down? Why art thou cast down? And when you look at it, and you ask yourself, hang on, this is a sad psalm. He's cast down, he's upset, he's disappointed. Why? What's actually happening to this person? And what this shows is that psalmists had struggles as well. We had sad news tonight, and we do have our personal struggles. No one is immune from that in life. And it doesn't matter how young you are or how old you are. It does happen in life to improve you, to make you ready for the kingdom. This son of Korah is going through crisis, but it's going to reveal what sort of person that he was and what sort of person we can be like. And he's actually asking, why art thou cast down, O my soul? Why do I feel like this? I know what I believe, but why am I feeling depressed and cast down like this? And you look at some of his feelings as you go through this psalm. Verse 2, he's thirsting for God. Verse 3, he's weeping. Verse 3, he's continually being mocked by other people. Verse 3 and verse 10, there's people that say daily, where is your God? They're pointing at, where is your God, you son of Korah? And so he's mourning in verse 4. But look at verse 4 also of Psalm 42. He says, I went. I remember these things. I pour out my soul when I went with them to the house of God. So he worked in the temple, and there was a time when he used to go to the temple, but he can't do it anymore. He says in verse 2 of Psalm 42, when shall I come and appear before God? He can't wait to get to the temple. Verse 7, he feels overwhelmed, drowning in waves of oppression. Deep calleth unto deep at the noise of thy waterspouts. All thy waves and all thy billows are gone over me. He feels cast off and rejected in 43 and verse 2. And he feels oppressed by one particular man in verse 1 of chapter 43. Oh, deliver me from the deceitful and unjust man. One man. Who is that man? Who is the son of Korah? Where did he live? Why did he write this psalm? Well, we get the clue from verse somewhere. It says Mount Hermon in there somewhere. Where does it say that? 6. Thank you very much. It says in verse 6, I remember thee from the land of Jordan and from the Hermonites from the hill of Mizar. So he lived near Mount Hermon. And we know Mizar there is a place up in Dan. It's a little hill in the area of Dan, known as Baal Hermon. It had been a place of Canaanite worship through the time of the judges, it had a checkered history. And so it actually calls, there's a man up there, a deceitful and unjust man living in that place where he was. Who was it? It was Jeroboam. Come to 1 Kings chapter 12. Now, 1 Kings chapter 12, we know the story that 2 tribes stayed with Rehoboam in the south, 10 tribes went with Jeroboam in the north. And Jeroboam didn't like people going down to the south to Jerusalem. He didn't like people going down there to Rehoboam. Jeroboam wanted everybody to stay in the north. And he feared that if people went down there, well, they're not going to like him. It's a danger to his new kingdom. So we read in verse 26 and 27, he was intent on stopping people going southward. If this people go up to sacrifice in the house of Yahweh at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people shall turn against their Lord, even unto Rehoboam. So they're going to turn against me, they're going to turn unto him. And so what does he do? He makes 2 gods, or 2 calves in verse 28. And he says, these are thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt. So he made 2 calves, 2 golden calves. Worship them. He set them up in 2 places in the north, one at Bethel and one in Dan. And so our minds should be ringing now because Dan is the north of the kingdom. That's where a son of Korah lived, up in the north, Mount Hermon, Mizar, a little hill in Dan. And so this is where a golden calf is up there for people to worship. And look what he did in verse 31. This Jeroboam, he made a house of high places. He made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not of the sons of Levi. So Korahites, which were Levites, lost their jobs. They've been sacked. And now that they're struggling, what do? We've got to look after our families. We need to still live. The tithes which we get from the work of priesthood, we're not getting anymore. So they can't feed their families. They've got no jobs. They've got no land because Levites didn't have land. What do we do? And so they all tried to go south, down to Jerusalem. Jeroboam didn't like that, so he stopped them from going. So if we turn over to 2 Chronicles chapter 11, and then it gives us a very important lesson. And this is a summary of this whole period of division. Now Israel had begun to fortify their borders, and there was war that started out between the two. But all the northern priests tried to go south down towards Jerusalem. And it says in verse 13, and the priests and the Levites that were in all Israel resorted to him. The him is their Rehoboam in the south. So all the priests that had been sacked by Jeroboam all started going south, migrating south to go down to where Rehoboam was. And it says that they left their suburbs, their possessions, came to Judah and Jerusalem, for Jeroboam and his sons had cast them off from executing the priest's office unto Yahweh. Okay, so now we've given you a lot of the history. We ask the question, well, what if that was you? What if you lost your job? You were sacked from your priestly work? You couldn't get to the meeting anymore? You couldn't see your fellow young people anymore? You couldn't get to a northern youth group anymore? And you were stuck. You know, we just had the pandemic just recently, didn't we? The COVID pandemic. And it kept us from meeting together for some time. And I know some people struggled with that because we like that human interaction, that companionship with one another. Imagine if that went on for year after year after year, 10 years. Where would you be? How strong would your faith be, young people, if that just kept on going and going and going, and you could not see your friends and you could not get to the meeting? See, that's the spirit of the son of Korah. He says, I'm feeling cast down. I can't get there. Jeroboam stopped me. I can't get down to Jerusalem to do my job. 3 times a year that all priests, Levites would go down to Jerusalem to do their duties. He couldn't get there. So he writes a psalm and says, I'm depressed because I can't get there down to the temple to do my duty. We didn't get to see our oldest grandchild until her 2nd birthday because of COVID. Imagine if it was 10 years or 20 years. What if we could never get to a meeting again to see our friends? How strong is your faith, young people? For those who are baptised and just done first principles, how strong is your faith? Do you really, really believe those things that you were baptised for? Have you gone further from that? Do you still do a bit more Bible study? As Paul says, have you gone from the milk of the word to the meat? How many nights a week do you devote to reading and studying your Bible? Or do you go out every other night of the week and the only spiritual food you get is at a Northern Youth Group or a Wednesday night class? Do you have any personal time with God? How strong is your faith? What do you read and watch at home that strengthens your faith? Do you have a whole pile of novels that you've got to catch up on, so you can finish by a certain time? A whole pack of DVDs on the other side, or Netflix things you're going to watch? Do they strengthen your faith, young people? This son of Korah writes a beautiful psalm because he just wanted to be in the temple. He just wanted to be there. Why can't I get there, he says, and he felt cast down because he could not get to that place. So make your way back to Psalm 42 and just read some more of those thoughts about this wonderful son of Korah. Look at chapter 42 and verse 9. He says, I will say unto God my rock, why hast thou forgotten me? Why go I mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? He's sad. He's depressed because he can't get to the meeting. Would you feel like that? Now we get sad or depressed if we open up our Big Mac box and it's all skew-iff and in different angles and slops everywhere. Sometimes the most difficult decisions we have to make is what do we have after a suburban, Macca's or Hungry Jack's? The son of Korah was disappointed because he couldn't get to the temple again. He was stopped by an evil man. So have a look now, as we've done all that context, and we can just go through it really quickly now. Look what he says in verse 1. As the hart panteth after the water brooks, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. And he's quoting this lovely little deer, panting, yearning for water when it's being chased by an enemy. And it runs and it skips across the countryside. And when it stops and gets to some water, it's panting for that water and it has to drink that water. This has been running, being chased by the enemy, in its case probably a tiger or a lion. Are you like that, young people? Do you pant that much if you miss out? If one night your family can't make it to a Bible class, and are you yearning to be there and you're panting because you're missing out on the Word of God that night? That's what this son of Korah was like. And they were like that all through history for 1,000 years. Would my family be like that? Would yours? What is really interesting, the last point that we got on that slide there, it represents our need for God and His Word in time of trial and struggle. The deer will even immerse its whole body, except for its nostrils, in water until the enemy passes. And you think of that, young people, what's the greatest answer to all your trials and struggles, or if there's adversity that comes your way? Immerse yourself in the Word of God. Just have the nostrils poking out so you can breathe and live. But all your strength comes from that. It doesn't come from all these other things that you might have on the side in your homes. It comes from the Word of God. And this psalmist so wants to be in the temple with his friends, worshipping God, being involved in temple music, temple worship, sacrifices and the treasury again. And he says, I remember the times when I used to go to the house of God, in verse 4. And he remembers those joyful times when it used to be like a Bible school. Or when you go to a Rathmines Bible school, you remember those times. The wonderful time was driving all the way across the hay plains, getting to a Bible school. And the happy times that you had when you got there. Well, you've got a youth conference coming up soon, and I can guarantee in 20 years' time, if we're still here, you'll reflect on that conference and how wonderful a time that was. And that's the attitude that he was in. And we still do, Leanne and I, my wife and I, reflect on the wonderful times we had at conferences, Mount Waverleys, and youth groups. Tears are flowing from him in verse 3. They've been in his meat day and night, and people are still saying to him, where is your God? All those up in the north, where is your God? Why isn't God watching after you? You can't get down south. Poor you. And thrice he repeats the dilemma of verse 5. Why art thou cast down, O my soul? And it's just a lovely thought in verse 6. It says, O my God, My soul is cast down within me. And we should never be afraid to tell God if we are depressed or if we're feeling cast down, if we're struggling. Never be afraid to tell God. He knows, but he wants to hear it from you. Neither should we be afraid to talk to someone else about it as well. If Phineas was a great help to the sons of Korah and he was younger than them, we've got plenty of people around us who can help us, young people, younger and older. He felt overwhelmed in verse 7. Deep calleth unto deep at the noise of the water spouts. He felt like Jonah going down into the depths of the ocean before the whales swallowed him in Jonah 2 verses 3 and 4. He was sinking and sinking, and Jonah identified with him. But in verse 8, yet Yahweh will command his loving kindness in the daytime, and in the night his song shall be with me. And he still reflects upon how wonderful his God is. And God always is, young people. If we have our moments of down and difficulties, God's loving kindness is always there. And so the psalm says, even in the night, I'll still sing unto God. I'll still sing those positive things, those positive songs about my God, even though I'm in deep oppression. The conflict of emotions in verse 9 as well. Why hast thou forgotten me? I'm going to go mourning because the oppression of my enemy is balanced by the positives in this psalm. And if you go through the psalm, there's the negatives are balanced with the positives. There's tears in verse 3, but there's joy in verse 4. There's tears in the day and in the night, but there's joy in the daytime, joy in the nighttime. It's always there, young people, is that wonderful joy. His spirit was disquieted within him, but there's joy also, the positive, in those verses. He says, why go mourning because of the enemy in 43 verse 2? But in verse 8 he says, Yahweh will command his loving kindness. So he always turns it to a positive. And so the lesson is always to find those positives in life. And even though the son of Korah, those three boys made this great stand, and they had this great following of integrity right throughout 1,000 years, they weren't without their struggles, they weren't without their trials. And this son of Korah was one of them. But he loved his God. He loved to be in the temple. He so wanted to be there. And he would do anything to be there. Even though he was stirred about it, he wanted to be there. So there was mourning, but there was also exceeding joy. He felt like there was a big sword going through his bones, piercing him asunder. But then he talks about the health of his countenance, and he was always inspired by his God. He talks about the ungodly nation in 43 and verse 1, or the ungodly man. But he also talks about the multitude of people who go to the house of God. It's just a lovely, lovely psalm about these sons of Korah. So I'd ask you in your own time to go through the rest of those psalms, read them. The sons of Korah for the next 1,000 years wrote psalms. The progeny of those three boys who stood up in the first place carried on. And ask yourself as you read those psalms, would I do the same? Would I tell it to the generation following? Will my progeny be telling it to the generation following them? If I have children, what will I teach them? What will they teach their children? What will they then teach their children and their children? And for 1,000 years, it's amazing. What will our families be like in that time? And we need you. We need you to stand up and be strong, to love the truth like never before in a difficult world in which we live. It's getting harder and harder. There's things that we say off the platform now that we never thought we'd ever talk about. And I take my hat off to you to be able to do it with the courage and enthusiasm that you do. Now, this psalmist only ever wanted to be in the temple. Let's learn those lessons and always want to be here, help and strengthen one another as the sons of Korah. So those are some finishing off lessons from the sons of Korah as we finish our evening. So from the sons of Korah themselves, always put God first, even above family loyalty. God is always number one. That's a lesson for me. I didn't have family in the truth, so I've learnt that. Number one. Make a stand against the world you live in, even if it's an unpopular stand. Sometimes you'll be faced with an incident at work where you've got to stand up and say what you believe in. Well, stand up. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the consequences are because you're standing up for God. And you can see how God takes it personally when you don't go on his side. Keep the door of God's house faithfully inside and outside. And as you move into ecclesial work, make sure we do those things. Keep the unholiness out, But keep what's holy, what's precious, what's pure inside. Keep it there and don't lose it. Value the example of mentors, those who can help, like Phineas, who might have even been younger than those three boys. And look to people who can guide and help you. And there's wonderful strength that you can gain from them. And pass on those essential values of truth and living it to future generations. Tell it to the generations following. Walk about Zion and be impressed with the aspects of the kingdom. And then, of course, from Psalm 42 and 43, and we could have done any one of those 11 Psalms, never be afraid to express to God all your feelings and ask for his help. Never be afraid. God loves to know what your thoughts are, and he'll answer accordingly. So therefore, young people, it's not a sin to feel cast down and sad in tough times. Godliness doesn't mean immunity from trial and suffering. And we know there's many Psalms of David or Asaph who felt cast down as well. It's not a sin to feel like that. But you've got to find the positives in life and the wonderful positive things that we have in the truth and with each other. The wonderful hope that's set before us. Be patient and hope in him. Salvation is coming. It's around the corner. I know we've been saying that for a long time, but it is. Every day that goes past is another day closer. We know that. Value the benefit of ecclesial meetings and activities. This person was so sad he couldn't get there, and he felt like he was as that deer panting, thirsty. Where's the water? Where's the ecclesial hall? Where is it? I want to be there. Let's have that same attitude, young people. And when it does, it rubs off onto other people. And other young people are strengthened by that as well. And have a yearning desire for the kingdom. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And let's hope we're all there with the sons of Korah and all their family. Thanks.